US 30 at Maryville. This is due to road construction blocking 2 left lanes. Looking at the Tri-State Tollway northbound just past Holstead. There's a crash blocking the left lane. Prepare to tap the brakes there. Inbound Kennedy, it's just a little congested around Nagel, 21 minutes O'Hare to downtown. Inbound Eisenhower, you've got a 2-minute delay, 17th Avenue to Des Plaines Avenue. Inbound Stevenson, the heavy pockets are between Cicero and the Ryan. The travel time has come down, 32 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive, outbound 29. Inbound Ryan delays are from the Stevenson to the Burn Circle, 20 minutes, 95th to downtown. It's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast. In our AM 560 Weather Center, we see a hot and humid day shaping up, hazy sunshine. Thunderstorms could crop up in the afternoon, about a 30% shot. High 95, hazy, warm and humid, low 76. Sunny, hot and humid tomorrow, high 94. Currently 81. Next news coming up at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by CharlesEquipment.com, keeping you powered up no matter what the conditions.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. I got a question. Are we, and should we be talking about a recovery or should we be talking about a double dip? Because I don't understand how we can have a recovery of any sort. I know the jobs numbers in May and June were good. They're much better than expected. 7 million new jobs in May and June, and that's great. But how can you have any sort of sustained recovery if the approach is to use lockdowns to play whack-a-mole with COVID-19? You're open, you're closed. You're open, you're closed. How does any business survive in that uncertain environment?
That's what's happened in Miami. All the gyms, all the restaurants that were open are now shut down again starting today.
And then what happens? Then the cases decline. And then you open again for 3 weeks, and then the cases spike, and then you close again for a month, and back and forth.
It's hard to keep employees then, you know.
How does that work? There's only so much money the federal government can print to provide the liquidity to keep businesses afloat. And we know, despite $7 trillion plus of said liquidity and disaster relief, they're projecting, the economists projecting a loss of a quarter of restaurants, a significant percentage of hotels in urban centers like New York and Chicago. So how does that work? How does that work in lockdown states, big blue states that have big economies and politicians that don't have a particular interest in the survival of their business community?
Well, Lori Lightfoot doesn't by imposing this stupid self-quarantine. That affects the businesses because people aren't going to travel to Chicago because they don't want to be locked in their hotel room for 14 days if they're coming from certain states.
That's not going to happen, but the message that's sent is why take the chance?
Right. So then cancel your trip, and that's what people are doing.
So how does that work? I ask again. How do you have, why are we talking about an L-shaped, a U-shaped, a V-shaped recovery with this policy environment, particularly in big states with big economies? Well, I'm not smart enough to answer that, but we have somebody who is. He's Andy Puzder. He is senior fellow at the Pepperdine University School of Public Policy, former CEO of CKE Restaurants for more than 16 years, following a career as an attorney, and also a former nominee for U.S. Labor Secretary. Author of the recently released Getting America Back to Work, and the soon-to-be-released It's Time to Let America Work Again. That's if America wants to work again, which is also a question mark, at least in certain quarters, as far as I understand. Andy Puzder, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So what about my confusion? How do you have a recovery of any shape if you have whack-a-mole, if you use lockdowns to play whack-a-mole with the virus?
Well, the economy does seem to be recovering despite the fact that we have these instances of flare-ups across the country. I'm not saying that it's the it's the best system for either dealing with the economy or the disease. But even the numbers we've gotten for July so far have been very, very positive. People are getting out. They are working. I think when the $600 a week bonus for not working expires at the end of this month, I think you'll see a further surge in people rejoining the labor force. You'll see the unemployment rate come down even more. Look, this isn't ideal, but I think it's good to keep in mind we don't need to get back to where we were in February immediately. We need to see the economy steadily improving. We need to see people getting back to work. And that's exactly what we are seeing. We're seeing this economy move in the right direction. And while the virus is spreading, I think one thing that we should note very prominently is that deaths are declining. Deaths have been very low. They were between 2,000 and 3,000 a day. Back in April, yesterday they were, according to Johns Hopkins, there were 325 deaths, and the day before there were 271.
Yeah.
Now, one death is too many, so 325 is 325 too many.
Yeah, but we had six here in Chicago.
We didn't shut the economy down because people were going to get sick. We shut it down because people were going to die in massive numbers, and we're not seeing those numbers.
Right, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but the last 2 days in Illinois, the whole state of Illinois, we've had, single digits, 6 yesterday and 6 the day before, so that's good news. But what's going to happen if they extend the CARES Act and people get that $600 weekly bonus?
I would be shocked if that were extended. I don't think that's going to be extended. I think if the people who would like to see that extended are the people who are trying to impose lockdowns in blue states and blue cities. The people who don't want the economy to recover, they want people to be home and unemployed, at least until the election, because the Democrats view this, one, as their wedge to beat Donald Trump in the upcoming election, and two, once they've done that, it's their wedge to what Joe Biden has very openly called transform America, from the very dynamic, strong, independent country we had just a couple months ago before this virus hit, into some version of a socialist Green New Deal country. That, I'll tell you what, if you liked the recent shutdown, if you liked the results of the recent shutdown, you're going to love the results of the Green New Deal shutdown, because it's going to make the last few months look like prosperity. So this is their key to transforming the country, and they will fight any effort to try and improve the economy because it's not in their political interest.
President Trump has signaled an openness to another round of disaster relief. You call it, I call it disaster relief. Somebody else calls it stimulus checks for Americans. Put more money directly in the hands of Americans. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I'm not a Keynesian. I don't think that putting money in people's pockets drives economic growth. I do think we needed to put money in people's pockets when we locked them out of their jobs, when we made it impossible for people to pay their rent or to buy food or to support their families. I think what we did was good. But doing it going forward, this idea that it's going to create demand, this is like when Obama said, this $800 billion stimulus that they passed in 2009, shortly after he was elected. He promised that unemployment wouldn't go over 8% if we passed this $800 billion in stimulus. Well, it went over 8% the month that it was passed, and it stayed above 8% for 43 consecutive months. Then they promised that the stimulus was going to create 3.8% GDP growth in 2011, and 4% plus in 2012 through 14. Well, as you know, GDP, our economic growth, never hit even 3%. That's all based on these Keynesian notions that if you put money in the economy, it's going to drive economic growth. That's just not true. If we need to give people money so they can survive, we should do that. We did it. It was important. And if people need money, we should continue to help. But to use it as a lever to drive the economy, that's ridiculous. We are driving the economy now. We're seeing it improve. We will continue to see it improve as long as government doesn't get in the way.
Don't you find it rather remarkable, the conversations we're having, where you have some people essentially taking the position, we can recover, we can have our economy recover without having an economy. We don't need productivity in the private sector. We have to bail out governments, of course, and we have to make sure that no government workers are laid off, and we need to print money to put in people's hands, and we need to provide loans for businesses that are loans that can be converted into grants for businesses that were shuttered by the government, and so on and so forth. But the one thing we don't need to do is ever get people back to work and entrepreneurs taking productive risks and all the other things that are the component parts of why we have the greatest economy, the most wealth the world has ever seen.
Well, not only is it ridiculous and hypocritical, but it ignores the human suffering this is creating. There was a study out recently by two medical foundations that said we are suffering an epidemic at this time within the pandemic. It's an epidemic of suicides, drug addiction, and alcohol addiction, which this study said could result in 150,000 deaths, independent of the pandemic, independent of the deaths that are caused by the virus. Look, there is, a government check is very much appreciated during a crisis, and we did that. And I'm sure that the checks were very much appreciated by everybody that got them. But a government check, sustained government dependence, is no substitute for the dignity of a job, the security of an earned paycheck, or the opportunity to improve your life and succeed. Those, you can't substitute for those things. You do not have a happy society when people are dependent on government, which is why in any socialist country you look at across history and across the globe, you see depression, misery, and suffering. And so we need not to head in the direction that the Democrats, led by Joe Biden, who was obviously having some mental difficulties at the time, but is being very influenced by the people he's surrounded with, who are very, very far left-leaning, want to transform this country into something I don't think many of us want to see happen ever. We've got to be very careful. We are at a touch point in our history. We've been here before, and we've succeeded. We fought back the proponents of collectivism and socialism. We need to do that again. This election is going to be very, very determinative for our future and the future of our children and our grandchildren.
Wall Street Journal, former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, now at the Hoover Institution, and a Fulbright scholar from Hoover, Pablo Tortolero, wrote a piece about USMCA, which took effect last week to very few people's notice. But they argue that this United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement can do wonders to expedite the recovery. They talk about, among other things, thinking about important states and states recovering that have 15% plus unemployment right now, like Michigan. Exports from Michigan to Mexico amount to more than $10 billion a year for that state. And they go on to just go through some of the data in terms of what they suggest and how important Canada and Mexico are as trading partners, which we understand. But do you hold also the same hope that they have, that the increased economic activity under the USMCA between our trading partners to the north and south can help move this recovery along?
Yeah, it'll be tremendous. The way to think about it is, and McMaster did a great job in that article going through the various data, but I think a simpler way to think about it is that the United States, Canada, and Mexico are now, in a sense, a unified economic unit. Much like what we did when we enacted the Constitution. We took 13 independent states and we turned them into a collective economic unit that eventually became all 50 states. We're now expanding that economic, not political, but the economic unit to cover these huge economies. Canada and Mexico have been our number 1, 2, or 3 trading partner for the past couple of decades. We've now got this huge economic entity, and it will be the envy of the rest of the world. We've now shown Europe, we've shown Japan, we've shown China what we're willing to agree to when we entered into this agreement with Mexico and Canada. It now can serve as a template for future agreements. But this agreement will be very significant, assuming we don't end up with a president who backs off of using strong negotiating tactics with other countries, that doesn't give our jobs away to other countries, that doesn't feel obligated to somehow try and appease the Chinese, as Joe Biden has done throughout his career. If we can stick with President Trump, if we can stick with these free market, positive for America trade agreements that he's been pursuing, then I think we're going to see a level of economic success that we've probably never seen before in our history. We were on our way to that level of success when the coronavirus from China hit our shores. we can get back there again, but we sure can't get back there if we elect President Biden and his team of advisors.
He is Andy Puzder. He's senior fellow at the Pepperdine University School of Public Policy, former CEO of CKE Restaurants, and following a career as an attorney and former nominee for U.S. Labor Secretary. He's the author of the recently released Getting America Back to Work and the soon-to-be released It's Time to Let America Work. Andy Puzder, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You take for granted the doors and entryways you use every day to get in and out of your facility. They do their job and everything's fine until it isn't. Your commercial door is stuck and your work vehicles can't get out, costing your business big bucks. Or maybe you're facing a fine for fire doors not being up to code. Did you know fire doors need to be inspected annually? The Industrial Door Company will ensure you're compliant, maintain records, and maintain all your facility's doors so you're ready to do business. And as things get moving again, now is a great time to make sure your commercial doors are ready for the coming increase in use. Visit industrialdoor.com to see a full range of products and services. Stop losing big bucks because your commercial door is stuck. Call anytime, 847-258-5620. That's 847-258-5620. Their team will be there to get you back in business. Since 1982, the Industrial Door Company takes care of your doors so you can take care of business.
You've all probably heard of asbestos and know that it's dangerous. You may also know exposure to asbestos